Hello!
I'm Ivy.
I'm Kalinda. We just finished reading The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman, book 1 of his Dark Materials. And by just, I mean like literally yesterday.
Yeah.
This was my first time reading it.
This is my second time reading it. First time in the last 10 years, though, so it's been a while.
Ooh. Ivy, how'd you like it? How was it rereading it?
Well, I mean, it's pretty much just as good as I imagined and remembered.
That's good.
As I said in the last podcast, there are definitely things that I didn't understand in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Things that I didn't get. And then also the fact that I get to read it knowing kind of the future of the story in its largest parts, right? That are very illuminating. But what did you think?
I really liked it. There's so many characters I just love, and different characters who my opinion has changed of.
Tell me about them. So which are your favorite characters?
Well, I feel like, is that spoilers?
Oh, no. I mean, there's a bear on the cover and we don't even meet the bear.
Okay, well, I love the bear.
Yeah.
I love him. He's great. He's my favorite. Oh, he's wonderful.
I like how Lyra feels about him.
Yeah, my dear.
I know.
My heart. Gets me. Yeah, some questions have been answered by the end of this book. Some have not. And so I'm excited for the future books. I do want to read them all. I haven't finished this book and been like, I'm done now. No, I finished it and was like, okay, how can I get my hands on the next one ASAP?
It is kind of funny when I think about, like, the problems of the first book in comparison with, like, the problems of just the next chapter. Because, like, I'm thinking of how much these demons and dust have played a role in kind of the problems that are happening here and what everyone's actually afraid of and who everyone's afraid of. And now I'm just remembering, like, oh yeah, I remember by the end of the book, the biggest problem had nothing to do with that. The biggest problem had to do with this other kind of metaphysical force that existed in these multiple worlds. Anyways, basically things get big, but this isn't a review for the whole series. This is just a review for the first book, so I shouldn't even be talking about that.
So I loved it. I definitely have this habit where when action picks up, I get way too excited and I just try to skip all the narrative until I see the dialogue.
Oh shit.
Where I'm like, okay, this doesn't matter. Whoa, things are happening. What? Just tell me, how does it end? And so I just like, I'll skip literal pages just reading dialogue because I'm like anxious and then have to go back and be like, okay, stop. None of this makes sense anymore because it's way too far removed. And I'm like, so did this person die or did they not die? Because clearly I skipped it.
Yeah.
So I made myself slow down and read some of the way that the action was written in here, and it was very good and very epic and like had a whole lot of more like feeling rather than just, I don't know, when I think of reading action scenes, they can get really bogged down in the details and trying to follow along can be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But I found that the action, some of the action scenes were like really wonderful, and I was really glad that I slowed down and I read them. So props. That was definitely a tell of great writing.
Yeah, I think it's also like comparing to young adult fantasy that, like, I mean, trying to kind of figure out what sets certain middle grade or YA books apart and what has fallen into these kind of stylized tropes, like the writing has become predictable, not so much the plots.
Yeah.
Even though that is true because it's so easy to have a traditional plot, right? It just happens because your brain goes there. But there's also like this type of how do you describe action? How do you show who a character is? And like, I think Philip Pullman does it really well in showing you someone who you feel like you might have met before. Like, you don't know everything about these characters. You can't sum them up, but you just understand that there's a lot going on with these characters that you don't have to know about, but it makes them fully rounded, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, the story is definitely, like, it's written much more like an epic, and I started to notice that the more that I read it,
Yeah.
than necessarily, you know, like, what I think of as being young adult or middle grade or some different things, you know?
Yeah. I mean, like, I would kind of compare it to Harry Potter because, like,
Sure.
it's told from Harry Potter's perspective, but it's not like we have to know everything about Harry Potter. There's so much happening in the periphery, in his everyday life, that isn't pertinent to the story, but we understand it's happening. And we only understand it's happening because of hints in dialogue, because she's characterized them like real people. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So this is totally unrelated. My apologies. My dog is next to me, and I'm on my bed, and I'll cover her head so that she can, like, rest. She likes it when it's dark. And sometimes, because she'll be crawled so far under the bed, I won't know where her head versus, you know, where her tail is. And then if I reveal her, there'll be a wet spot, and I'll be like, she peed the bed. And I'll be very upset with her. And I just realized I pulled back the cover, and there's a wet spot around her head. So
She drooling?
she just drooled. She just drooled like a big spot. Like, it definitely looks like she just peed the bed, but I know where her butt's been this entire time. That's definitely where her face was. So she just, like, anyway, that's hilarious. Okay, starting now, we're gonna head into some spoilers. So if you have not read the book, and if you don't want to be spoiled, then come back later. Go read the book and come back. If you haven't read the book and you don't care about being spoiled, maybe still go read. But if you just want to listen, we won't judge you.
Okay, so a spoiler starting now. Spoiler-wise, what did you think?
I don't like Lord Asriel.
I know, right?
And it's like... So I still do think that I stand by this idea that, like, he understands Lyra maybe better than Mrs. Coulter does in terms of, like, who she is, or that they connect differently, even if it's just because he's been around for her life more than Mrs. Coulter has. Marissa is her name, turns out to be.
I know, right? The thing is, like, I listened to it as an audiobook. So in this particular audiobook, which it was the first audiobook like this I had ever seen where it had more than one narrator, so that Philip Pullman was reading the narrative parts himself, and different actors of different ages were playing the characters' dialogue, right?
Wow.
So they had, like, a young girl to be Lyra, and so on.
Oh, wow.
But so they had someone to be Asriel and someone to be Coulter, and honestly, like, their performance of that, it's uncomfortable. I can only imagine what it was like for Lyra to witness it, right? It really makes you feel like what the hell? Especially because it's like, it's such an inversion, because you think of a child seeing her parents together, but they're such an unorthodox family. They're not a family. They have these strange ties to each other, but they're not a family. And this moment is almost like it's all three of them together, but it's wrong.
Well, and they don't know that Mrs. Coulter at least doesn't know she's there.
Yeah, but I just think Asriel doesn't care.
No, he doesn't. I think that's something that, like, yeah, there was something that really struck me where, like, I didn't feel as though Asriel sacrificing children was something he might do. I didn't think that it was possible for him to do that quite the same way that I, like, knew Mrs. Coulter could, right?
Right. And I mean, it is a little different, because I had the same notion where I actually forgot that Lord Asriel had almost the same objective as Mrs. Coulter. I kind of thought that they were working against each other, even, like, because I guess I wasn't paying attention the first time I read it, so I didn't realize that actually they both wanted to rid the world of the source of dust.
Yeah, Mrs. Coulter wanted to get rid of the influence of it. She didn't think it was possible to go to the source so much, right?
No, but the point, what I'm saying is that they both don't want dust. They both think dust is a bad thing, or something to get rid of.
Yeah.
That actually, like, surprises me, because my concept of Lord Asriel was, I thought that he dug dust. I thought he was into it.
Yeah.
But the difference between what Mrs. Coulter was doing and what Lord Asriel was doing, even though they seem to have been in conspiracy with each other, like Mrs. Coulter made it a systemic, experimental, clinical kind of en masse system of doing this, right? Whereas like Lord Asriel, he did it to Roger
Yeah.
on purpose. But to him, he probably was thinking of it as like a true sacrifice. Like, it is terrible. I don't want it to happen to a bunch of kids, but I'm going to do it to this one kid. It's all for the greater good. It's very Machiavellian. And like Mrs. Coulter is also sort of Machiavellian, but I don't know. It just the kind of way that they both tackled this issue, I think, was very demonstrative of them as people.
Yes. And I think I was also just surprised how, like, in a lot of ways, how even though they act as though it's for the greater good, both of them seem incredibly selfish. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Both of the it seems that both of them, like, these are their own personal goals. This is like almost, I don't know. Something about it felt selfish, you know? Yeah, I guess I don't know what to think of Mrs. Coulter anymore. Whether or not she, like, really was wanting Lyra in her life and trying to get her back. But, like, whether or not she really loved Lyra, it felt like a selfish love. She didn't actually really care that, like, maybe that wasn't where she wanted to be. Maybe what Mrs. Coulter did wasn't what she wanted to do. You know? Everything about them is incredibly possessive.
No, I think that, like, that's what I was talking about before it, but it's become, like, now we get more from it, more from the story to kind of illuminate it, where you're kind of like, how much are what Asriel and Mrs. Coulter doing concerning Lyra because of parental care and unconditional love, and how much of it is selfish and proud and about status or their own manipulative purposes, right? And so the thing is, like, Mrs. Coulter, I think that particularly Mrs. Coulter, Lord Asriel, I think, you know, like we said, still would have had this kind of fathership that is a step away, right? Even if he had a traditional family life, he would be kind of a distant, cold father type, even though, you know, it doesn't mean that he didn't care about them. Whereas, like, yeah. Mrs. Coulter, she wanted Lyra close to her, but what she said to Asriel about, like, it being too late, that Lyra is more his than hers, and it's because Mrs. Coulter probably missed, you know, her baby, but then wanted to have Lyra on her own terms, not Lyra's.
Yeah.
Didn't really care about who Lyra was as a person.
Yeah. And that's kind of true for both of them, but it felt far more noticeable with Mrs. Coulter.
Well, I mean, I think it is different, because I think Asriel doesn't need to mold Lyra. He doesn't care at the same way Mrs. Coulter doesn't care, but he doesn't care because it doesn't matter to him.
Sure.
Like, it doesn't affect him objectively.
Yeah.
And it's, like, quite telling, because then it throws a wrench again about what we were saying before, because I remember thinking that, like, this before rereading this book, right? Going off of the first reading from ages ago, that, like, Lord Asriel and Mrs. Coulter are shit parents, and actually they're just shitty parents, and that's the end of it. But then I know the end, and
mm-hmm.
I know that they do something for her that is partially because there was no other choice, but also for her sake. And, like, you know, when I finished the series the first time, I remember thinking, like, oh, they do really love her, ultimately.
Not that they're just, like, making up for it. Not that they're just making one sacrifice in the face of all their other bullshit.
Well, I just mean that, like, they probably didn't want to be parents.
Yeah.
But they do have, like, an innate desire to protect her or whatever. I don't know.
Sure.
My point being, like, the moment when Mrs. Coulter finds Lyra in the intercision room.
Yeah.
Like, I think that was real fear. That was not just...
Yeah.
The thing is, like, there's reason for them both to look at Lyra and think of her as a chess piece. As, like, this will be good for what I need to do for my own ambitions, right?
Yeah.
And I think that largely that is how they think of her. But when it comes down to it, if Lyra's life is in danger, they have a problem with that. It would horrify them.
Yeah. I mean, the same way that, like, it seemed like Lord Asriel was not willing. Like, when she showed up at the door, he's thinking, like, I can't sacrifice you.
Exactly.
But he'll sacrifice another kid. And Mrs. Coulter sort of being willing to experiment on these other children. And maybe they'll die, and maybe, you know, they'll learn something. But not Lyra.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's hard for me at the end of this book to feel like that has to do with Lyra and not with it being like, not my daughter. Where it's like...
It's because of ownership?
No, just this, like, I don't know. I think it's really strange when someone can think like, oh, it doesn't matter if these other people sacrifice their lives because I don't know them, you know? But if it's someone that's, you know, my daughter or like the person that I'm related to, suddenly then it's a problem, you know?
Except that I don't think that they would feel that way about anyone except Lyra. So it's not just like if it's someone I know, then it's a part of my world and I actually have to recognize that. They don't think like that. I don't think that when, you know, Mrs. Coulter sees Lyra about to be cut, that she's thinking, oh, maybe this really is wrong, or like, this shouldn't happen to someone I know. I think she'd do it to anybody's child, but not her own because she has this motherly protection over her. I think that it's important that Mrs. Coulter and Lord Asriel both had those moments where they demonstrated their abject horror at the prospect of hurting Lyra. Each of them, it's the most selfless we ever see them.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it makes me think that there's some lack of empathy or something going on.
Oh yeah, probably. They totally read a sociopath, I'd buy that.
And that's definitely why it's like, not my daughter, 'cause my daughter, but anyone else's kid, whatever. It feels like there's something there that's not... Yeah, I would say there's a lack of empathy. You disagree, but that's okay.
Well, yeah, I disagree because I hate the words you're using. It's probably that...
I know.
And the thing is that then you don't agree to the words that I'm using. Because...
Yeah, I know.
I asked you if you thought it was because of their sense of pride. Like, a daughter of mine won't do such and such. A daughter of mine won't be treated such and such. That it's a point of pride that they won't allow Lyra to be a part of this thing. But I mean, maybe I'm being too optimistic, but I really think that it's because, like I said, deep down, when it comes to it, they feel the need to protect Lyra.
Sure.
Plus, there was something interesting that I never noticed before, but it was at the end where Asriel's footman, valet, whoever, servant, told Lyra that he has a way that he can call things and they will come to him. I mean, when he sees Lyra and he's like, I didn't send for you, I didn't call you, the thing is, like, that could have meant that he asked a servant to send a message for someone to deliver a child or whatever.
Yeah.
But then what the manservant says is not quite that. It's that Lord Asriel has some innate power where he can summon things, which I don't remember. So I don't know if we ever find anything out about that. But I think that it is... I think I could justify it even if we don't get any more explanation about it, but as something that will set Lord Asriel apart as a player in this prophecy. And so if... I actually forgot this, but I'm pretty sure that, like, if this is a retelling of Adam and Eve, I think Lord Asriel, despite how he feels about the source of dust and his desire to get rid of it, perhaps he is playing the role of Lucifer, because he draws Lyra to the north.
Yeah.
And I'm also thinking that, like, Roger... Like I told you that we go to this new world, there are new characters that are introduced in the next book, but actually thinking about Roger's death in this moment and how she's moving forward to meet this other character, because obviously we need our Adam if Lyra's our Eve, that you might think Roger was her Adam, because it even said that, like, these children were at the age when boys and girls stopped playing together, that the sexes started to just naturally divide themselves.
Yeah.
But Roger and Lyra had this, like, loyal as fuck relationship.
Yeah.
That they would have done anything. And that Roger totally idolized her. And Lyra would protect him.
It's so sad.
I know.
It's so sad.
With Roger's death, like, what does that mean to me? Because to me, it feels like this kind of passing of the torch. Like, Roger was the boy in this book, but we're going to meet another boy, right?
Sure. It at the very least answered the betrayal question for me.
Yes.
Where it was like, I see now. That was heartbreaking.
Yeah. Actually,
sad.
Like, it was really sad, but I forgot to mention last time, like, when we saw Tony,
Ooh.
and he was, what do they call, like, a zombie? A ghost?
Oh, yeah.
I remember that scene, because you can't not. I remember that scene when I was, like, 14.
Yeah.
And it struck a chord. But rereading it, I was in tears. And then when he dies and she's like, she wants to see the body, and then she's mad at someone for taking away his bit of fish that was all he had.
Oh, yeah, I think I was crying like that whole time.
Oh my god, it's so sad.
Especially when she carved into the coin.
Yeah.
I was just, like, crying.
But again, it's kind of like going back to those night gasps of, like, it's kind of interesting how, like, such a childhood prank turned into a matter of moral principle with her, because, I mean, it's not like she technically is any different than the Egyptians, who didn't really know what to make of Tony, you know, who saw Tony and were appalled rather than sympathetic. But Lyra, I think that a large part of Lyra being so sympathetic in that moment and caring towards Tony is because of that little prank in the tombs. And how that made Pan feel.
Yeah. Yorick.
Yeah.
Being like, shame on you. Shame on you guys for not.
You gonna finish that?
I'm gonna cry because I love Yorick. Yeah, that battle, when I was talking about the writing and how good it was like, especially that battle between, I don't know how to say their names, but I always just say Yorick and
the other one,
Yofer or whatever.
Yorfarachnis and
Yorfarachnis. I don't know how to say it. I know how it's spelled.
How is it spelled?
IOFURRAKNISON.
Shit, I can't spell it. I can't do that in my head. That did not form words in my head. Yeah, Yorfarachnisin. Got it.
Yeah, especially, like, that battle, where I made sure to, like, take the time to read it, and the way that it was written was very, very good. It felt super epic, and, like, putting Lyra's feelings about the battle into it was really great. It may have also been, like, because it wasn't a battle that Lyra was, like, fighting herself, that may have been some of the way that, like, the writing helped there. But yeah, that particular fight scene was really wonderful and great.
Well, because also that fight went hard.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, that's one of the things about Yorick Burnison, is that he's so, like, one of his biggest character traits is that he is a bear, and he is what he is, and he knows it, and he's not ashamed, and he follows his truest nature.
Yeah.
So to see him fighting in the same attitude of self-assurance and self-knowledge is so powerful. And Lyra's pride in him makes it that much better.
It's so good. It's so great.
But I think what's also interesting with Yorick Burnison is that one of the reasons Lyra kind of thinks of her relationship to Yorick and why she feels so strongly about him is because of his situation being like her father's, like Lord Asriel. And then she thinks of Yorick Burnison sort of as a father. But then when she sees Asriel, she says that Yorick Burnison cares more about her than Lord Asriel does. So it's funny how to see that, like, that relationship is in its first steps kind of thought of in those terms, but then we find out that the relationship that their relationship was equated to was false. And this is a truer affection and caring for each other.
Yeah. There were a lot of moments where, like, the pain and suffering of small characters that we didn't really know, like, would make me cry, right? And it's like, we don't really know this person, but they just died, and so I'm crying. And, like, you know, it's written very well. Because you were saying earlier that you don't have to know everything about a character, right, to really feel like you understand them. And I definitely felt that way with, like, I mean, Tony, right? Mm-hmm. Tony dying. My heart. So now she's walked into the sunshine. So that's something I feel like I don't understand. Is like, mm-hmm. I would imagine that if these are, like, it's one thing if it's like it's a different world entirely. It's like some portal where you're stepping onto a different planet. But if this is just like, if this is closer, if this is just supposed to be a different Earth, I for some reason was imagining that stepping through a portal like that would put you in the same geographical location, mm-hmm. just in a different world, right? Mm-hmm. But it looks like it's a desert. And I'm like, so that's not... that's clearly not tundra.
Well, different worlds. So, like, if we're saying how similar Lyra's world is to our world, it's pretty similar.
Yeah.
But if we consider what Asriel was saying about the magnitude of how many numbers of different universes there are.
True.
There's probably a universe in which the North Pole is a desert.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I'm just curious if it is that she's gonna come out still near the North Pole, or if she's gonna come out and gonna be somewhere
in the Africa.
Yeah, or something, you know? I mean, not Africa, because who knows what world she's going to. You know, it might, for all we know, be not Earth, but, you know, that kind of desert, like Sahara. But yeah. So I'm interested to see where it is she's going. I don't know.
Yeah, I actually have a feeling that if I remember it correctly, she ends up in kind of like it's a lost place. It's not a place where people are really supposed to be.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a weird bridge area. I can't remember. So I don't actually know. I mean, like, from what I remember, it is sort of like if you step through to another world, but you're in the North Pole, then you end up in the North Pole in another world. That is how I remember it. But this particular instance, I don't remember. Especially because, like, they talk about a city in the sky. So it's not just that it was like a landscape in the sky. Particularly in that spot, there is a city, right? I don't remember how it all works. My 14-year-old self was not paying attention.
Yeah. I'm interested to see, too, if, like, because I don't remember if we were talking about this on or off podcast, but we were mentioning, like, the parallels between a world like the one in the Golden Compass and between one like ours, where there is no daemon and there just is no, like, there's no equivalent.
Yeah.
But I think we were talking about the alethiometer, because the alethiometer works with dust, and I'm wondering how much, like, there is dust in these other worlds. Like, that seems like a fundamental particle, but is that fundamental particle...
Does it exist everywhere?
Does it exist everywhere? And if not, will the alethiometer even work? Because she's talking about, you know, going to these other worlds and saying, yeah, well, I'll have the alethiometer, but it's like, will it work? Is there dust in other worlds? Is that something that's, like, even possible?
Well, as far as Lord Asriel considers it, dust is coming from these other worlds. That it's not naturally even in their world. It's from outside of it.
I know. So I feel like I'm just as curious as these characters to figure out where dust is coming from. But I really liked Pan at the end being like, well, if they all think dust is bad, then it must be good. It's like, yeah, that's great. That's good.
It is kind of funny to think like she saw Asriel and he was an explorer and she thought that was so cool. And the way science and religion are intermingled in her world, and that Mrs. Coulter was someone who introduced her to scientists who were explorer scientists rather than, you know, scholar scientists.
Yeah.
And that actually, thinking about it, the thing is, like, all the things that you're kind of like, how does it work? I'm gonna say, like, part of Lyra's journey is discovering these things and then having it outright affirmed, right?
Sure.
It's not even like is this how it works? It's like, that's what she's there to do. She ends up finding out everything there is to know about this stuff. And she's like 12. And, the scholars at Jordan College and the magisterium are probably like, they're like mystified by this stuff. They're scared of it because they don't know what it is. She finds out from the highest source what all this stuff is. It's like having God just tell you all of the answers.
Oh, yeah.
Right into your brain. You ask the questions and deliver the exact answers. So she becomes this kind of explorer and this kind of scientist.
Yeah. I was thinking how great Father Coram was because he seemed to know so much and was like super well traveled. And I was like, oh my God, this guy knows like frickin', he's been everywhere. He has all these different connections to all these different things. And, he's older, so I guess it makes sense that, he's been more well-traveled and is getting to know all these different things. Lyra's like 12, and she's already, like, there, right? Like, I'm imagining her when she's older having these stories. It's like, yeah, she's on, like, a personal first-name basis with the king of the bears.
Yeah.
Right? King of the Panzerborn. Like,
she's so beloved by him, she has her own title, Lyra Silvertongue.
That was so cute. I love that it just kept telling her to trust him.
I know. The lethiometer being like, don't ask again. I said
it's like,
the answer.
Why are you asking me again? Like, yeah, and of course, when she shows up and she tells him what he did, he's like, you tricked him? He's like, perfect. All I wanted to do was to fight him.
I know.
That's all I wanted. And then it's like a done deal, right?
I love that moment when he's like, I want nothing more than this,
Yeah. And he's so smart because he tricked him. I'm sure even if he didn't know that Lyra had tricked him while fighting him, he would have learned pretty quickly that it would be possible to trick him because he is a genius.
Well, we also find out that the bears are kind of under influence.
Yeah, a bit under influence and then, just confused and sort of trying to follow the king and not knowing who they are or what they are.
Yeah, but it also seemed like not only was Yorfer under some kind of, I don't know, they talked about maybe some drug-induced stupor or confusion or something by Mrs. Coulter, but...
Yeah, definitely for the bear that Yorick killed that got him exiled.
Yorfer.
What? Yorick killed a guy that had been drugged.
You're right. Okay, yeah, you're right. But I'm just saying that, like Mrs. Coulter did that. And all the bears were affected, not just the king. And it wasn't like the king was affected and then everyone was trying to figure out what was wrong with him or what they were supposed to do. It was that they were all under this kind of spell or whatever.
Huh. Yeah, it's interesting to think of, like, the power that both of Lyra's parents might have in different ways, right? Like, Mrs. Coulter has this ability, it seems, to just, like, charm people. But I think they were talking about maybe her smell.
Yeah, being metallic.
And then sort of being covered again, like maybe perfume. But I was almost wondering if she wears a sandalwood perfume.
Is sandalwood significant?
Sandalwood was what was lining one of the trunks, because it's supposed to keep demons from, like, it's supposed to make them feel funny, right?
Huh.
And that was the trunk that Lyra hid in the Egyptian ship. And Pan just sort of, like, fell asleep immediately, right?
Oh, I didn't remember that.
When they were, like, curled up in there. And that was how, we're able to smuggle them, was that it was lined with sandalwood. And so I was imagining Miss Coulter having some sandalwood perfume or something.
Well, the thing is that Mrs. Coulter's metallic scent is not described as having an effect on the demons, though.
No, it was like the metallic scent came through when she was angry.
Right.
I was more thinking the rest of the time. It was...
Oh, to be more soothing to other people.
Yeah. Fan theory.
I don't know, for some reason I got it into my mind that this metallic scent had something to do with when her demon was doing something.
Oh.
Because they also talked about, and maybe I'm just isolating this one incident, and actually we see it again and it's not the case, I forget, but I remember that, like, she sort of has this metallic scent when the monkey is far away from her, because the monkey's snooping in Lyra's room.
Oh.
I don't know. I mean, with all the experimentation Mrs. Coulter does, I wouldn't be surprised if she and her monkey have tested the limits of how far they can separate.
Yeah, interesting.
I'm not sure, though.
Ho ho ho. Yeah. Oh god, the monkey and the snow leopard just sort of like rolling around. Oh my god.
Yeah, it's also why that scene feels so wrong, even though it's supposed to, like, by normal standards, if they were a traditional group of people, it wouldn't be so appalling, but because of who they are, and it's just such an inverse of what it should be, like I said. But it is kind of important to see that Azriel and Marissa, that what it is to see two people in love and how that translates through to their demons, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, if you can call what they have, like, love, it's more like passion and mutual infatuation with each other's ambition. Like, I feel like their connection has everything to do with their own selfish ambitions and pride.
Exactly. It's all this, like, weird power struggle.
Yeah.
They're so...
They're so weird. But it is kind of interesting to think of their demons, because a snow leopard and a monkey, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Like scratching and digging their claws into each other. It was awkward.
Yeah, but I mean, it is important to consider, especially what Lord Asriel said about castration and equating the intercision with castration, and therefore equating a demon with a sex organ, especially what he said about original sin.
Yeah. Yeah, that made me really curious if castration, like, if that meant at all that their demons stayed the same still. If it seemed like demons gained a fixed form during puberty. If you're castrated and your voice stays high, did the demon get a fixed form?
Oh. Well, because the other thing that they said, though, was that when a demon becomes fixed, that is when dust becomes the most damaging, or like that when a demon becomes fixed, that is original sin, that like that's the moment.
Yeah, that the dust really collects onto the...
Right. It is a good point to think of, because like I don't think that they are thinking, though, that castration actually keeps you from knowing original sin.
Sure.
I don't know. But it is interesting because also if you think of the nurses, how Mrs. Coulter said that plenty of the nurses here have had the operation, right?
Yeah.
That their demons had a fixed form. And so I was wondering, like, can you be cut post-puberty?
I think so. I think that's what happened with the nurses.
Because then, like, what if you got cut and you grew up? You're right. Does the demon continue to change? But I mean, the other thing is that those demons were so lost that they didn't have the energy. And the other thing is, like, considering that demons, I don't think demons eat. So they gain their energy and sustenance from their connection with their human.
Yeah.
Presumably. I mean, the nurses obviously show that it's not straightforward like that, but maybe it's that they're fine enough post-puberty. If they are cut after puberty, then maybe it's okay. I don't know. There are a lot of questions there, and I don't really know if they all get answered, because that's all Bolvanger. That's their own secrets and their own systems, rather than like the universal knowledge.
Yeah. And it all got burned down, so...
Yeah.
Well, the demons that were then cut and were kept so far away from their counterparts, like when the kids were sent off after being cut or whatever, and there were all those sort of ghostly, thin, sort of see-through demons that the goose was leading away. Who knows if that's because they're far apart or if that's just because they were cut, that they sort of have that weak, thin form, but...
Or also what they said about the nurses and how they had to handle all these children, but they were all very slow and confused, and that they couldn't really take charge of the children because they were kind of absent-minded.
Yeah, they weren't really great.
Yeah.
At caring for a bunch of kids.
But situations, books that have things like a demon, there are always, those quizzes that are like, what type of demon would you have? And such and such.
Yeah.
And I remember when the movie was coming out, they made a really good one that had like so many different varieties of different types of animals. So it was really like
Mm,
comprehensive. Maybe the quiz was just whatever, but at least the amount of options that they had were very specific. Of course, that's
mm,
down now, unfortunately.
yeah. What do you think your demon would be? That's always the funny thing is, what do you think it would be versus what would you want it to be?
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, there's all reasons to have like a practical demon, right?
Yeah.
Like a dolphin is very much not a practical demon,
Yeah.
as they said, but something like a snow leopard, pretty practical because giant cat totally intimidate people.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't know, it's kind of funny to think of like all the demons that we've seen because there's all the things that Pantalaimon has turned into, but there's a number of cats and obviously a number of dogs. And we saw a butterfly, we've seen a monkey.
Well, and dogs often being associated with people who become servants.
Yeah, dogs, it was said that all servants have dog demons. But they're different types of dogs, right?
Yeah.
And rabbits and birds, crows, lots of crows. I feel like a lot of scholars will either have a cat or a crow,
Mm.
at least from what I can tell.
Yeah. Birds. Lots of different kinds of birds. I know I would want, like, what I imagine. It's definitely like fox. Duh. But then being more honest about my personality, I don't know. What if I'm like a bunny? Who knows?
I could see that.
Could turn out that my soul is freaking anything. Like, I'm not cunning and intimidating and, I don't know, like a fox. Like, I love foxes. But I might not really be like a fox.
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably more, I like to cuddle. And I'm not very intimidating. I'm probably more like the bunny that the fox would eat, you know? Well, and I'm so curious to think, like, what Lyra's gonna...
What she's gonna become?
Yeah, what's Pantalaimon gonna, like, end up settling into?
I think, okay, so what I was gonna say was now that I'm older and like getting this again, that the idea is that your demon settles in puberty. And I'm just thinking like, what kind of person is done, baking at 13? Like
Yeah.
whoever I was when I was 13 is not exactly representative. I mean, I do agree that, there is narrowing of options at that age that like it does set the stage, but I mean, God, I'm so different now. Like maybe when I was 13 to 18, you could say that I was this one thing and it would have been accurate, but now I've changed so much, even just in the last 5 years, that like
Mm-hmm.
compared to when I was 13, which was way longer than that, I'm not the same person. And I don't think the demon, if it was stuck as it was when I was that age, it's not like it would be far off, but it still wouldn't be the same. Wouldn't be true.
Yeah, maybe not, huh?
Anyways, when I took the quiz that they had for the movie ages ago, I think I got some kind of like bobcat, which was cool, but also like, in what world? I'm not cool enough to be a bobcat.
Yeah, I feel like I need to look up what an ermine looks like, because I never remember. And Pantalaimon is frequently an ermine.
Oh, I'm actually not 100 on what an ermine looks like either. I was just imagining like a white ferret for some reason.
Yep,
Oh,
same.
okay. So we must be at least close.
Ooh, they're like a weasel.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Oh, it's cute. Oh,
Actually,
it's small and cute.
I would probably want to have a demon that was small, that would just stay in my pocket all the time.
Yeah.
Like, people having ones that are, like, big, I'm like, God, but they can betray what's in your mind, as does happen with Mrs. Coulter and her demon a lot, because her demon is restless, but Mrs. Coulter is being, like, so sweet, but it's completely, like,
Yeah.
out of sync, so it's duplicitous. Whereas, like, Pantalaimon is always turning into a moth so that Lyra can conceal her feelings or something.
Yeah, which I think is super cute. Or, just becoming small and even just hiding in her pocket.
Yeah.
Like, I still almost can't believe that she managed to trick Yofer the way that she did. To be like, yeah, I'm a demon. Like, oh my god, girl. She's so strong. She's so courageous. She is such a better person than I could ever be. I'm really loving this story and feeling such an appreciation for it and these characters.
I think actually there was a great moment when she was in the cell with that scholar and
Yeah.
she was trying to get information out of him. And I think it's particularly relevant how much it was referencing back, like because he was a scholar and because he had issues with some professor named Trelawney.
Yeah, I actually remembered mentioning of Trelawney like chapter 1.
And the thing is that, like, she's trying to get information out of this half-crazed man, but there is still kind of like a limit. And comparing back to how she used to talk with Roger about how Lord Asriel was caught by the Tartars, and then Lord Asriel gave them this look, and the Tartar just dropped dead of fear, right? And Roger wasn't sure if he believed it.
Yeah.
And all these kinds of stories that she would come up with, these kinds of fantasies of imagination and these lies that she would tell, and then seeing it here and seeing how much it's matured, how much she has learned restraint.
What a great book. I'm so surprised how much I enjoyed it, especially after the fact that I didn't, like, that I got 100 pages into it last time and just stopped. It feels so dumb now.
Most books that are really good are like that. That's one of the reasons why, like, if I'm, like, in a reading slump, it's so much easier to read a shit book. But then when I come to the end of it, I'm like, ugh, that wasn't worth it. What am I doing? Why am I reading books I know I won't like? And then I look at a book like this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's so much work. Better books are more work to read.
Oh.
Even if they're so enjoyable, even if they're the best book you'll ever read and you just love it, it's still work.
Yeah. I feel like that is a good way to describe that.
I mean, the thing is that, like, I'm listening to it on audiobook, so it's significantly less work.
Mm-hmm.
Highly recommend.
Yeah.
We are not sponsored by Audible or anything, but...
Audible. So much less work. New tagline. Look, did it for you.
It is kind of funny that it's a little irksome when you have, like, different actors playing all the different parts.
Mm-hmm.
But it becomes, like, really effective.
So do we have any more to say about this book, though?
I don't think I do.
I don't think I do either. Other than I really like it and the characters. And I'm really interested to see now that she's entering a whole new world, are we going to see these characters again? Are we ever going to see these people? Or is she just going to live in other worlds? And I'm like, but I love all of them. Is she saying goodbye forever? And that makes me sad.
The thing is that, like, so there's book 1, Golden Compass, then subsequent books in the trilogy, The Subtle Knife and The Amber Spyglass, and, of course, what just came out this year is The Book of Dust, which I don't know if you know about.
No.
It is a new book taking place in the same world, like, not, because the thing is when you say that something takes place in the world, when there are multiple worlds in this world, it's, you know what I mean, though. So,
yeah.
As I understand it, somebody was calling it a prequel, but I actually think it's a sequel. It's not about Lyra, but it takes place in Lyra's world, this world that we've been exploring in this book, when she's an adult.
Oh.
Yeah, so I think there are new characters. I don't really know what happens at all. I've heard it's pretty good, but obviously that's so new. That's like in the last year. Whereas this was 2002, at least this edition that I'm reading. I imagine it was older, like 90 something.
Copyright 1995. Wow, I had no idea. Wow, that's so old. Lol. It's dumb because it's still younger than we are.
I actually am like, that's not that old. Mostly because I have this placed before, like, the advent of YA as we know it.
That's so good.
Yeah. And actually, like, I forget everything that happens now because, like I said, the thing about the Golden Compass is that they have a movie version. So I have watched that recently, and I watched it when it first sort of came out. So I had kind of, like, the Golden Compass's main plot points, like, fresh.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it wasn't, like, the book's version or as detailed as that. But, you know, just, I remembered Yurik. I remembered the bear fight. I remember when he gets his armor back. I remember Lee Scoresby. I remember the witches.
Yeah.
But my mom forgot about the witches. Totally. Completely. And
Sky Iron. Sky Pine.
yeah, I'm like...
No, Cloud Pine.
Like, does that mean there are trees in the clouds? Or is that just a type of tree that tends to grow in the mountains in the clouds? I have no idea.
I know, I don't know. I feel like that's something that I still really love about this book. There's some weird fantasy bits where I'm like, we still don't know what those are.
Yeah.
Or if they're anything. Like, what? Nobody knows.
But it kind of makes the whole world more real, more immersive.
I know,
like,
it's great.
They don't explain everything. And it's kind of like the same thing I was saying about how he writes his characters. You don't have to know everything about them to kind of get this notion. The idea that there is a world where Sky Iron exists and people talk about it flippantly, like everyone should know what it is, without me having to know what it is explicitly, tells me that this world is real.
Yeah, people just know about witches. And people just know about armored bears.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
So, like, starting now with the subtle knife and Amber Spyglass, I'm, like, so lost. I don't remember anything. There's no, like, big moment. Like, they're a hodgepodge. Like, I remember maybe that one scene, but I have no idea which book it happened in. And I don't remember where they were. I just remember somebody saying that. And honestly, the other thing is, like, once we get into, like, other worlds, they're not all like Earth. You know, sometimes they're like labyrinths and it's a metaphysical place. It's not a civilized place. Or...
Oh, sure.
I think that when she goes through that portal or whatever, she's not in another world. She's in some other kind of lost place. There are lots of lost places. Or they end up in like just so many different places that are not like the Earth, not like Lyra's world, or like our world. They're like some other plane.
Mm-hmm. That sounds awesome.
So I have like no accurate visual setting for it. I'm like, that's an amorphic location that, you know, if you were filming it in my brain, you'd be filming it in like a giant white room where you can't see the walls. And it wouldn't be white, but it'd be black or gray or some kind of like version of Underworld. I don't even know.
Yeah. I'm so excited now.
Yeah.
You've got me so excited. I mean, I was already excited, but now I'm like,
Well, consensus is we liked this book and we're super excited for the next two. Would recommend. Hope you enjoyed our podcast. I presume we will be reading The Subtle Knife very soon.
Yes, I would. Fingers crossed. I hope so.
So
stay tuned. Okay, I'm Kalinda.
I'm Ivy.
Thanks for listening. Catch you on the flip side. Bye.